On the eve of Father's Day, Ejaz Ahmed Chaudhry of Mississauga, Ontario, was shot and killed by the Peel Regional Police in his own home while experiencing a medical episode. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I am your host, Taha Ghayur, bringing you another episode of Canada Today, where we explore our community, our country, and our people, and our news. It has been a heart-wrenching 2 days of, as Canadians watched in horror the events of Saturday's murder come to life amidst raw video footages, news articles, protests, and campaigns for justice for Ejaz Chaudhry. As we are told by family members of Ejaz, as this tragedy unfolded, the police officers had the information and knowledge that Ejaz did not speak English. Ejaz was experiencing a medical episode. Ejaz had an ongoing mental health issue or crisis and was a physically frail man. Ejaz was posed no danger to anybody else other than himself at the time. And Ejaz was scared for his life when he saw people in uniform, and he told his family members before that about it. And Ejaz's family pleaded with the police to let them intervene and de-escalate the situation. And they were told that yes, the police is going to de-escalate the situation. There are many questions that are yet to be answered. Why did the police respond to a help call by a family for a mentally ill person who clearly needed a mental health intervention, not a police intervention? Why did the police need to climb the balcony of when the family was asking for help, in other ways? Would the police have reacted the same way if they were dealing with a mental health situation or individual? Would the police have reacted the same way if they were dealing with a non-racialized minority group individual? And will we see justice served for Ejaz? Well, today we have a panel of guests who will shed light on this tragic story of police brutality. Please help us welcome Rabia Khidr, the Executive Director of Muslim Council of Peel, an organization that is demanding a public inquiry into Chaudhry's death. She also serves on the Muslim Advisory Committee of Peel Regional Police. Assalamu alaikum, Rabia. Thank you for joining us.
Wa alaikum salam. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent.
Great.
Thank you.
And also, we have today Carolyn Parrish, Councillor Carolyn Parrish, the City and Regional Councillor of Ward 5, which is one of the most diverse wards in the city of Mississauga. And Malton falls in her riding, which is where the tragic shooting took place. So thank you, Councillor, for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. And we also have Asifa Sarang, the Executive Director of Across Boundaries, an ethno-racial mental health center. This is a unique organization that provides mental health and addiction support exclusively to the members of racialized communities of Toronto, and has been there doing this work for 25 years. She's also a resident of Malton. So it's a pleasure to have you, Asifa, join our show today.
Thank you very much, and assalamu alaikum to all your audience.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. I want to start off with Councillor Parrish. I wanted to start off by asking you, have you ever witnessed anything like this in Malton region? Any story of police negligence and brutality of this sort?
To be absolutely honest with you, we have a new police chief, and he immediately is restoring our community police station, and the COVID slowed down the opening of it. Under his new regime, he's been here 6 or 8 months. I see a big change. I see a lot more patrols. I see a lot more plainclothes, young officers mixing, doing barbecues with some of our townhouse groups. Malton, unfortunately, has a lower socioeconomic level. It's one of the areas that needs a little bit of a boost in the economy, has high unemployment, especially amongst youth. And this chief seems to be really putting forth an effort to make changes there. The COVID slowed him down, but I've never seen a shocking shooting like this before. I know there was one in Brampton a couple of weeks ago, but it's terribly wrenching for the community. I also have to compliment the community. They've peacefully protested. There's no vandalism, there's no nonsense. They're very peaceful, they're very sad, and they're just demanding something other than the police investigating themselves. I assume that'll be finished, and then hopefully we can do a full investigation.
Okay, well, thanks for answering that, and we'll come back to you for a couple more specific questions about what you just talked about, actually, about Peel Police itself. Asif, I know you came to know this family recently, and the family of Ejaz Chaudhry, and you were there actually the night this happened. Can you please walk us through what actually happened and what you came to know, and how did the family deal with this tragedy over the last 48 hours now? Sorry, are you able to hear us, Asifa? It seems like we have some technical issue here.
So yes, I
Okay, I think
I heard about it, and I can tell you when I received the text. Oh, can you hear me? Yes.
There seems to be a bit of a connection issue, but I think if you continue, it seems to be getting a little better. So let's continue. If not, then we'll try again.
Okay. So as I said, I heard about this at about 2 o'clock in the morning. I didn't, it was a busy day for me, so I wasn't following the news or anything, but somebody sent me a text, a family member. And the moment I received the text, I have to tell you, I was paralyzed, because we as an organization at Across Boundaries continue to deal with the impact of COVID and impacts of anti-Black racism on our clients, and of course, impact of police brutality on members of our communities. I sat there for a while and I said to myself, what do I do at 2 a.m. in the morning? And then I said, no, I can't just sit here. So I went out to the family's home, met up with my family member who knows the family. And, I walked in, sat with the daughter, went in, met up with the rest of the family. And I have to tell you, it was just such a scene of devastation. I think people were still in a state of shock. The grieving will come, but at that time there was shock and there was anger. There were questions about, did we do the right thing about calling the paramedics in the first place? Guilt. I mean, a whole slew of emotions that were going through people's minds. And I mean, if I was impacted just by seeing that video, the moment I got there, it was chilling. It was chilling to see that video. And for me, it took me back to another client of ours, Andrew Loku, who was shot by the police. And yeah, it was just horrible.
This brings us to this very important conversation, and this is such a multi-layered conversation, of course. But I wonder, how are people going to, and this is what I'm hearing actually from people even on the streets and in our community, that how are people going to trust these phone lines and these text lines and helplines in future if they ever have to call for a help for medical episode or mental health episode? How are they supposed to sort of trust these agencies that are here to actually protect us? And of course, there's so many unanswered questions. What actually led to all of this? But really, do you think people should still have faith in all these helplines and helplines? Because we know majority of the people working on these calls and all these individuals who are working so hard behind the scenes, on the front lines and in the behind the scenes, are hardworking people trying to really, really help the community. But this is going to a lot of people are going to lose faith in the system, and which is what I'm hearing quite a lot in our community.
You're absolutely right. And if we're talking about just calling the police, for example, or the paramedics at a time like this, I think there is a lot of mistrust in the system. You're absolutely right. I've heard since and there seems to be a pattern since Regis Korchinski-Paquette in terms of police officers coming, asking the family to stay away, and then them continue to deal with the individual themselves. And that's not working. I think the family needs to be an absolute part of those communications, that dialogue, because they have that connection already. And on top of that, I think it's really important that families continue to kind of advocate to stay in the space where this is happening. I heard of one family where the police were called and they asked the family to leave the room so they could deal with them. And after having seen what's happened in the community, they absolutely refused. They said no. And even with this family, I know that they had wanted to stay. They had even gotten some legal, I believe, feedback in terms of a waiver and whatnot, but it was not adhered to. It was not accepted. So they had to move away. So yeah, I mean, this is going to raise a lot of questions in terms of who we call now.
Exactly. Well, thank you for sharing that. Sister Rabia, Muslim Council Peel has been on top of this since it happened. You recently had a meeting, I know, with Chief Nish Durapa of Peel Regional Police as part of your Muslim advisory team or committee. Can you tell us what transpired at this meeting? What kinds of conversations you guys had, and what were some practical steps that the chief himself and Peel Police is going to take? I understand we are talking about an investigation here that is going to take some time, but what needs to happen between now and the report, when the report comes out?
Well, I initiated an email copying all of my Muslim Advisory Committee members, and I offered to chair this meeting intentionally because I wanted it to be community-driven, not police-driven. The chief of police, his equity staff, community relations staff, deputy chief were a part of the conversation. A couple of our imams and other community leaders were also part of that conversation. We know the chief is new. He's coming with new and fresh ideas. We know that there are historic systemic problems across the board, and there's not, like, Peel Police is not exempt from those systemic issues. Systemic issues of anti-Black racism and other forms of racism and discrimination, and just the whole absolute systemic mess of how we handle mental health calls. So when someone has mental illness, they have identified that they have a mental illness or an intellectual disability or a capacity issue in that time, and families are desperate. They can't manage on their own. They reach out. The only crisis service is police, and they should not be the first responders in mental health cases. They can be supporters if needed, but they should not be the only response. Families don't have choice. Friends, allies don't have choice and are forced into those positions. We know that they deal with several calls a day, and most of those calls are resolved, but they're resolved for the moment. There's no, again, long-term support mechanism to help minimize crises for families. I've been on all sides of the equation. I have made those calls on multiple occasions. And the outcomes have been just calming the situation and letting it pass. The systemic gaps are systemic gaps in community-based services and supports to help people cope, to address the barriers that they're facing, and to offer support so they can improve their quality of life. We sent very strong messaging to the chief of police yesterday. Okay. A killing is a killing is a killing. We emphasize that. We said we need transparency and accountability. that trust has been broken. We've invested a lot of time in educating our community, in building trust with the police. People are fearful of the uniform, are fearful of the badge, and we've done a lot of work to overcome that. And suddenly, this incident has undermined all that effort. We need to regroup and rebuild that trust, and we need justice, and justice delayed is justice denied. We really have to, we recognize that there's legislation that invokes the mandate of the Special Investigations Unit. Society has lost confidence in the Special Investigations Unit. We don't expect anything, miraculous to come out of it that's going to change anything. We know that there is implicit bias in the current process, and we need this process to move on, and move on very quickly. We need to put pressure on the system to make sure that the SIU gives priority to this case, expedites its report, so we can move on. So we can move on and deal with the person responsible. So, and when I say deal with the system person responsible, we expect that the police department should take swift action, and swift legal action as an employer. This should not be weeks and weeks and weeks, which is what we typically see in SIU cases, and then years and years and years of court.
Yes. Okay, so let me get comments from Carolyn, Councillor Parrish, as well as Asifa. I'm wondering, Muslim Council Appeal, as you heard from Rabia, is calling for an independent inquiry into this case. What are your thoughts on this? Do you agree that there's a need now at this point for us to have an independent inquiry, or are you satisfied with what SIU comes up with, basically?
Well, my problem is, I agree with Rabia 100% on fear of uniforms. I can remember seeing our mayor doing an announcement, and as the preamble, they had a SWAT team guy standing behind her, and he was outfitted from top to bottom like a Star Wars guy, holding a machine gun. And just the stance and the costume and the way they revel in these uniforms, I can see how that would terrify little kids, never mind adults who are in distress. My father was a policeman in Toronto for 37 years. And when he came home from work in his uniform, which wasn't all that scary to anybody, it was cloth, and he didn't even bring his gun home. The kids in the neighborhood would all come over, flock down to see what he'd done today and what he was doing. And the police seemed more in tune with their communities. They walked the beats. Now they whip around in cars, two in each, and they've got shields behind them. So first of all, I think we have to have a really strong look at how we outfit police. I think they go to these gun shows and police shows, and they want the latest gadgets and the latest guns. So that one disturbs me. But I like to back it up one more step and say we need, when we're having students come out of grade 12 to apply to go to police college, we need deep psychological testing to see if they are conducive to working with people instead of pushing people. And I'm not saying a lot of the police are like that, but there are those that get through, and then they wear these Star Wars outfits and they come storming into a house, as Rabia says, and they terrify everybody in the place. I think we should also, instead of 911, which unfortunately sends out whatever happens to be available at the time, there should be a different one, an 811, for mental illness and sensitive groups to come out and work with those people. Chief Nish brought in the Mobile Crisis Rapid Response Unit, but they are probably called out 5 times a day, 365 times of the year. And you don't hear of anything happening on all of those ones. But when you have a bad one like this, it scares people, as Rabia said, it shakes the community. And they've done a lot of work in Malton. We have some Muslim officers there. We have a lot of young officers that are working with the kids. And one incident like this will put them back, as Rabia says, it puts them back 5 years in getting used to working with the police. So I agree with her. I think we should be looking at a different emergency number for health emergencies, and you don't send police. You send whoever you've got, the best paramedics, the best trained people, even community citizens who have training can serve as volunteers, but something needs to be done with that.
Interesting analysis. Asifa, what would you say to that?
So I'd like to step back one more one step further, I think, and go back to what Rabia was saying about the public inquiry. And I think I would say 100% agree. Having lived through an inquest, having lived through recommendations being provided and nothing happening with them, I feel like it's just a token process that that gets people's hopes high when they get the inquest, but unfortunately there is no resolution coming out of it. I think what we also need is, I agree with what Karen said, a separate number, something that takes away from the police arriving, the fire people arriving, and everybody else that's not necessarily needed. We also need to look at, I think Carolyn, you mentioned, look at who's coming in through the system in terms of police officers or graduates and whatnot. But I have to say that it's not just the police system; it's every system that we interact with as racialized and marginalized people, which is broken. It was built that way, and so it's not broken. It was really built that way. A phrase I heard, which really makes a lot of sense, because systemic racism is embedded in every single institution we deal with, and so we cannot just take these. We have to have a broader kind of consequences of interactions. We need to start there. And yes, reallocation of resources, absolutely. We need to have a lot more mental health support workers involved in these responses. Other places in the world have different ways of dealing with this. And so we have places where we can learn from. So
Yes.
We're not unique.
Very, very good point. So, there was an investigation that found 70% of deadly police force involved victims with mental health issues. So why has there been no action taken, in our own police systems here when it comes with all this advancement in mental health awareness that, people like Asifa and Rabi even are involved with, dealing with people with disabilities or special needs? Is this a lack of training? Is it a lack of, or is it just not a priority? Or is it some systemic issue that we need to deal with? I mean, because you deal with this all the time, I know, Asifa, and some of you have been involved with these kinds of cases personally or even at organizational level. Why is it that we're not seeing this change, even though, yes, you guys have been talking about it, and you're talking about some places where you can learn from it? But Asifa, you said that there have been recommendations made in the past. Where did those recommendations go?
Exactly. That's our question. Where did they go? They're filed on a shelf somewhere. There is lip service made to those recommendations. There were, out of the 39 recommendations that came out of the Andrew Loco inquest, 17 related to police and race. I remember, making a deputation at the Toronto Police Services Board's meeting where the chief presented their response to those recommendations. And what I heard and what I read was simply that we're doing more of the same. There was never a moment to step back and reflect on what we are doing wrong and what we should change. And even up to the last, I think 2-3 weeks ago, when the chief was asked that question, we are doing this, we have been doing this, and we'll continue to do the same. And that's not going to help unless people are able to step back and reflect really clearly on what's not working and have the courage to say that this is not working. It won't change. And I hope that the environment that we're in right now, that this is the momentum and this is the moment that some of those changes can take place authentically.
In fact, I mean, I think what is interesting and sad at the same time is that Ejaz's killing or death, I guess, unfortunately, is not the first time we experienced something like this, even in the most very recent history, where wellness calls turn into something so tragic like this. So in the recent months, 4 other similar cases we have come across where, if either Indigenous people victims or Black victims who received inadequate care or experienced deadly violence by police. So my question to you, to all 3 of you, do you think what we are seeing, in Ejaz's case or in the cases of these 4 other individuals, has anything to do with some sort of or some level of deep-rooted bias in systemic, basically, problem when it comes to Peel Police or Peel Region Police or Toronto Region Police or any other police that we are talking about here. And maybe we'll start with Rabia. You're on mute. Sorry. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead. No. Sorry. You unmuted yourself. You muted yourself again. Sorry.
Okay. There is definitely implicit bias, structural bias, systemic bias in the entire system. The systems have been designed by people historically within positions of power and have been designed to serve their interests. So, and to maintain power. Unfortunately, there has to be a will to share power, to deconstruct a system and reconstruct it to meet everybody's needs, to put everybody at an even keel. And that's not happening. And one of the challenges we have, Daha, that you were asking earlier, why hasn't change happened? Why hasn't change happened? Because people with disabilities, people with mental illness, people with addictions issues, and on top of that, racialized people with those issues are not an effective lobby group. They are not seen as economic contributors. They are not seen as a powerful vote. They are marginalized. They are forgotten. They are left, they make a headline and then the ball drops. Right now, I think people are tired of that. That's why people are being persistent and consistent and loud about their demands. They are demonstrating their anger. And I don't think they're going to let up that easily because they're tired of reports being shelved. They're tired of waiting.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Councillor Parrish, recently there was an interesting tweet, actually part of this is part of Mayor Bonnie Crombie's response to this recent tragedy. She tweeted saying that the 2021 Peel Police budget will be reviewed through a different lens. And as you know, there are a number of Toronto city councillors who are introducing a motion to cut the police budget. And there's conversation, of course, happening about defunding the police and reallocating some of the budget to mental health workers. What are your thoughts on this? And what did Mayor mean when she said that we're going to be looking at a different lens?
Well, she's the only one on Mississauga Council that can actually affect the police budget. I think listeners need to understand that there is a police services board. It has the mayor of Brampton, the mayor of Mississauga, the regional chair, and 4 people appointed, 3 of them by the province, who may or may not know a lot about what goes on in the region of Peel. They set the budget. They decide how to prioritize the way they spend it. It comes to the region for $500 million. If we don't like the budget, the police budgets in Ontario have gone up 38% in the last 10 years. If we don't like that, our only option as a council is to send it back to the Police Services Board and ask them to review it. We did that last year. They held on to it for 2 weeks, sent it right back to us and said, nope, we can't change it. So our other option would be to send it to the province and ask the province to have a look at it. Now, our current premier has said all his daughters date or marry police officers. So if we sent him that budget, what do you think he'd have to say about it? I love cops and they need money and that's what you do. What needs to change and what Toronto is doing is they're asking the province to change that system of approving of budgets so that those of us who collect the money, collect the taxes, understand our communities, know what the needs are. We can say to them, you're not buying all those new gadgets this year. We're going to put you into special training. You're not doing with this money. I don't believe in defunding. I believe this year it should be frozen and there should be reallocations. But we can't tell them that. I, as a councillor with 35 years in politics, I can't tell them where they put their money. Now, again, I'm optimistic, and I think my 2 other guests are, that this new police chief does intend to make a difference. We have to give him time. And
Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't answer your SIU question properly. I believe we should listen to the results. If we're not happy with those results and the community's not happy, then we should go to a full inquiry. I did not answer that question. That's not like me. I always answer questions. But
Thank
as
you.
far as funding the police, I think there should be a big freeze, a reevaluation on where they're spending their money. And I was reading in the paper today, a police officer after 4 years coming out of grade 12 makes $100,000 a year. And as far as people feeling weak and unable to fight back, part of it's poverty. If you have, if you're a new Canadian, the mom's working, the dad's working, nobody's watching the kids as well as they should be. They're worried. They're not going to start advocating for a change in anything. They're putting food on the table and they're trying to become full-blown Canadians who can hold a job and put a roof over their heads and survive in this country. So I don't fault them for not lobbying. I don't fault them for not knowing who to call and what to do. What I fault is the system that doesn't protect them.
It's interesting. You spoke, Councillor Parrish, about that you actually showed solidarity with all the people who came out on the streets and they protested peacefully. And it's actually beautiful to see people from all over, not just Malton, but actually all over Mississauga and in fact Greater Toronto area, who came out to actually show solidarity. My question is, what role, Rabia, I wanted to ask you actually, what role does protest play? Because I've heard all sorts of arguments for it and against it, and you hear this all the time. You hear this sadly even when it comes to Black Lives Matter story as well. And people say, well, why waste time on the streets? Why protest? What are your thoughts? Because I know you're an advocate yourself of coming from Muslim Council of Peel. What are your thoughts on these protests, and how long do you think these kinds of protests should last, and what impact should these have?
We live in a free and democratic society. People have the right to assemble. They have the right to protest. They have the right to have their voices heard. One of the things that I always say about myself even is, thank God I grew up here, because here is where I have the right. It's a great country. It's a wonderful country, but I have the right to voice for more to make it better. And so that's a right. And people are learning to exercise that. Change happens when there are multiple efforts going on. We cannot change the system from within with a limited number of allies without external pressure. And today that external pressure is really important. Peaceful pressure, but strong, firm, clear. Mm-hmm. We need to continue that because we don't want just another report shoved in the cupboard. We want action.
I think one of the amazing things that came out of this sad incident was the fact that the story of Ejaz Chaudhry was loud and clear, thanks to all the people who worked behind the scenes to get the media to cover this, thanks to all the people who came out, of course, to the protests, thanks to all the people who made noise on social media and talked about this and constantly talking about this. And this is, as you said, is important because that's how advocacy works. Numbers matter. Your voices and the volume of your noise actually matters. So it's great to see the kind of support we saw. The other thing that was also interesting is within a matter of 48 hours, we see hundreds, if not thousands, actually, of people donating online to the GoFundMe campaign, which is launched just the night of the killing or the morning of the next morning. And we see so many people, and you can see now more than half of the target is already reached within 48 hours. And we encourage everybody who has not contributed to make sure that they do go and support the family. This is the least you and I can do, and make sure that we contribute whatever you can and share it with at least 10 of your friends to make, to help us reach this target of $100,000. And really kudos to all the people who who got this campaign up within a matter of a few hours after the tragedy happened. So Asaf, I wanted to ask you a couple of questions. More specifically, you said that you have dealt with similar situations in the past. When you heard about this story, what went into your mind, knowing that this was basically a call of distress, a person or a family dealing with mental health issues, and you deal with this all the time? I'm wondering, is this something that you deal with often? And if yes, is this something that you foresee happen again in the community, unfortunately?
Yeah. Yes, we do deal with this often in terms of dealing with the police. And yes, I see it happening. It's not going to stop anytime soon. A statement that we put out today, we said that, we used to say no more as a slogan. Now the question is, how many more, right? Because unfortunately, I don't see that change coming soon. And even under this great scrutiny of what's been happening after what happened in the States and after in Toronto, I feel like, is there like an acceptance for police officers to behave that way? Is it okay? Because with all the scrutiny, how is it that we can have another case where somebody shot so violently and just killed so violently and without almost any consideration, right? Based on what we saw. So as an organization, we deal with people who are from racialized and marginalized communities around the world. And one of the things we do is, if there's ever an issue or a need, we're very careful about calling the police. Partially, it's because people have come from areas of more, where there's been war, and heightens the mental health issue to begin with. So we'll be very, very careful. If we do have to call the police, then we will make sure that we are a buffer between the police and our client. We will make sure that we are present, that we identify exactly what the issue is, so that there is no opportunity for something negative to happen. If somebody's out in the community, we'll try and make sure that our manager is there in the community, or a staff person is there when the police is present. I mean, we're trying to put as many safety nets as we possibly can within the resources we have. More than 50% of our client base is from the Black community. So this is something that we're super vigilant about on a daily basis. And so when I, as an executive director, hear these things happening, I feel like it, outside of the families that are dealing with this and the communities that are dealing with this, it also takes a chip away from me. I feel like my whole soul is impacted, because it's just, there's this weight that lands on me. And I feel like, how long can we continue to deal with this? So there is an impact not just on the individuals in the community, but also on the people who are providing the services, particularly to the communities. And that's another nuance of this. I think I would also say, you had asked a question about what causes this sort of a response. And I think there is embedded racism, of course, in every institution, but we're also dealing with Islamophobia, right? I mean, I read a report where it said that of all of the kind of online chatter, white supremacist chatter lines, anti-Muslim sentiment ranks third highest. So if that's already happening out there, we can imagine how it permeates all of our individuals, institutions, communities. And so the reactions that we're seeing are actually not surprising, because it is an insidious kind of phenomena that's happening right now within our, and the fact that with COVID-19, those sort of sentiments have increased considerably.
In the story of Ejaz Chaudhry's, killing, unfortunately, we see so many barriers. We know that he did not know English. He couldn't speak. He couldn't communicate with police, and police is screaming, saying all sorts of things, and the family members are telling them, look, he does not understand what you're saying, and they're still doing whatever they wanted to do. He had a mental health issue and mental health episode. He was physically, weak and physically incapable of doing much, even walking much for that matter. And of course, he comes from a racialized community of specific ethnic community, and happens to be Muslim. So Rabia, do you see parallels in our recent Canadian history, or even Toronto history, of similar cases where a person, an individual with so many obstacles in life had to meet such an end, unfortunately?
There is a trend of racialized males, racialized Muslim males, or those that are perceived as Muslim. We have Abdi Abdurrahman, we have Suleiman Fakiri, we have Sami Yatim, who was not Muslim, but he was Middle Eastern. These are all individuals. We have DeAndre in Brampton most recently. So we have a number of these men with psychiatric disabilities or mental illness who have been shot by police. We have a problem. Something is wrong. Something is broken, and it's time to fix it. And I gotta say, right now, straight up, that Across Boundaries does amazing, amazing work, and I have a lot of respect for ASIFA. They have been doing mental health work from an anti-oppressive, anti-racist lens, looking at racialized communities and their unique needs for a very long time. And their work really needs to be ameliorated in other systems. And we need to take that holistic approach to service delivery. In this case, Taha, the one other good thing, the fact that this story has become so public, is it's also brought mental illness into the public domain within South Asian communities.
Yes. Very, very good point. Very big taboo topic that will require a show of its own that I want to really talk about, especially the issue of mental health issues among men, adult men, which is becoming a real serious crisis that our community has not been paying attention to, unfortunately, and really so much can be said about this. We can say the system has failed them. You can say our community has failed them. There's schools have failed them. There's so much that can be said, and there's so many painful stories that we hear of families dealing with adult men who are going through some very difficult psychological problems, and it's a big conversation we need to have soon. Carolyn Parrish, as we conclude in the next few minutes, I wanted to ask you, you being of course, counselor of the region, have you had any communication with the family members of Chaudhry, Mr. Chaudhry, who passed away? And what kind of support is your ward and is the city offering in this case? Of course, every death is tragic, but given the circumstances and what we have seen unfold over the last couple of weeks, a couple of days, is something that, of course, would have required some probably higher level of attention on your part. So I wonder what it is that your office and of course the city is doing to support a family of this, in this crisis situation.
Well, I'd like to start from the personal. I will be making a $1,000 donation to the GoFundMe. I will also offered opened up Paul Coffey Park tomorrow. The city has agreed to open it, where it has been closed and wasn't due to be opened yet, but it's enough space to spread everybody out for a ceremony and a funeral. So that's been done tomorrow. We've talked to Malton Mosque, and we've offered them financing for tea and food and whatever they need. From my milk fund, I do a big fundraiser every year, and I have money there for such projects. As far as Malton is concerned, it's a very closely knit group. And right next to the mosque is Trinity Church. They were out in the protest tomorrow. They will be helping with the funeral. It's like a big happy family. Well, not maybe so happy today, but big family. And it's very multicultural. I know the Sikh community is going to be helping tomorrow. I know all these small groups are getting together because they all feel bonded to each other in Malton. So it's a terrible thing to pull them together, but it's a wonderful community, and I have a lot of faith that it's going to work out very well for them. I spoke to the nephew, and he and I ended up in tears at the end of the conversation because I felt quite helpless being here with a broken leg and not being up there with them. But family seems strong, And as has been mentioned, their protests have been very peaceful. There's been no looting, there's been no nonsense. And they have gained a great deal of respect through the media and through the mayor is absolutely distraught over this and loves the community. She was their counselor before I was. So they're going to get all the help they need. They just have to pick up the phone. Danny Singh, who works in my office, has been up there every day helping however he can, and we're here to help.
Excellent. This is beautiful to hear. Thank you very much for whatever you are doing in your capacity as well as our city. I wanted to ask Asifa a question about, as we end, a couple of things. One is, specifically, I wanted to ask, going forward, knowing all the stigma that is attached with mental health issues and knowing what just transpired, which really is scary for a lot of families who deal with mental health family members. If something like this ever happens in a family situation going forward, what should be their first step, and what are some of the things they should keep in mind before they make whatever call they need to make calls?
It's such a difficult question. I think my reaction is to say, don't dial 911. But I know that there are instances where they will have to, and so I think it's a bigger question, Taha, because as Muslim other communities that are from the Muslim background, I think we need to deal with the stigma. And yes, you said there will be another show on this because it is a big issue. But we need to understand that, while we talk about mental health generally, we need to normalize mental illness, be able to speak it comfortably, speak to it, spiritual leaders able to understand and support people who are in those situations so that we don't end up at a crisis point. And I think that's the biggest piece, because we don't get help at the right time. We end up in those spaces where we have to interact with these systems. So yes, if you have to call, I think let's find out our rights. Let's find out what are some of the steps we can take to ensure the safety of ourselves and our ill loved ones. And I don't know, at this point, all I can say is stay with the family member if you have to call, because we cannot let this sort of mishap again happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much. I guess the last thoughts I wanted to get from all of you, what are some of the things that we can take, what are some of the things that we can do actually, first of all, for the family itself that is currently grieving and going through a very difficult challenge, of course, of burial and then of course the whole grieving process. What are some of the things you would recommend that we can do for the Chaudhry family? Of course, one thing we already know is the GoFundMe campaign that we encourage everybody to donate to. But are there any other things that Rabia or any of you want to actually share with us that we should be able to do and should be doing actually to help the family over the next few days?
I think for the next few days, there is a lot of support that's kicked in. The bigger challenge is going to be long-term support. So we shouldn't just forget them because they're no longer making headlines. That's really, really important. And we should continue to seek justice. That is what will give them solace. That is what will give them comfort in the long run. Today, we're angry, we're upset, we're hurt. Tomorrow, the funeral happens, he's buried, and the community goes home. Once the community goes home is when the real grieving starts for the family. When they are alone, that's when it starts. We have to make sure that we are there for them in the days and weeks and months ahead, not just in the next few hours.
Excellent. Very, very good point. Carolyn or Asifa, if you want to add something, please go ahead.
I think one of his sons was only 7 years old. I think it's very important to tell the teachers in the local schools, remind them that these children may have bad days. They may have a need for extra help and some understanding. So that's extremely important, as has been said, that we have to not forget them. We have to not go through this and then say, okay, now we're on to the next thing. I think the school system and the social services have to be reminded to take care of that family, check in on them, check in on the children, make sure the children are cared for well while they're at school.
Okay, great. And Asifa? Oh, I think you're on mute. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. I was saying that I totally agree with everything that has been said. And I think another layer that we have to remember is, as Muslims, one of the things that's really important to us is that we bury our dead loved ones right away. In this instance, this family has had to deal with the fact and the knowledge that their loved one is not gotten the burial that was needed right away. And so I hope that not only do we need to provide them supports in different ways, but also from a spiritual way, we have to understand the trauma and the effect that it's had on the family. And so I hope absolutely over the period of next whatever time, we continue to stay involved and engaged with the family.
Well, thank you very much. I wanted to really personally thank every one of you, all three of you, for being here with us. It's a difficult conversation. It's a heavy conversation. I wish we didn't have to actually do a show on this topic, but it is so critical and so important for us to talk about these issues, because it's part of our healing. It's part of a closure that we need as a community, as we deal with such tragic issues in our communities. So I wanted to thank Rabia, Khidr, Asifa Sarang, as well as Councillor Carolyn Parrish, for taking a time out of your very busy schedules for being here with us. And as been said, this is not a short-term thing. This is going to be an ongoing conversation. There's so much that needs to be talked about, whether it's the systemic issues dealing with within our police systems and police boards and systems, or we're talking about treatment of racialized communities by police, or otherwise, or when we're talking about our issue of mental health, and especially mental health involving adult males. So there's so many layers to this, and there's so much to unpack. But we've heard so much today. There's so much to think about and deliberate over, and unfortunately, it's a time for a lot of raw emotions. It's been difficult for some of us even going to sleep at night lately, thinking about all the at multiple levels the tragedies that we're seeing around in our own communities and around the world. So with that, thank you all of you for being here with us. And thanks to our wonderful audience for listening and tuning in. And wanted to also once again thank our wonderful team of producers and production team who has been helping us produce this. Thank you to Dawanet and Toronto Muslims for being our marketing partners. Once again, Jazakumullah khairan. Thank you for being with us. I hope we continue to fight for justice and stand up for justice, regardless of who it is. Who is suffering. We should be on the front lines. Thank you once again. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.